This is the companion video for Chapter 6, Other Game Sounds. In this chapter, you learned a little bit about adding extra types of sounds in your games that aren't really ambient sounds. Up until this point, we've been focusing on ambient sounds in games since those are some of the most important sounds. But in this chapter, we go over things such as changing gun sounds, setting up footstep sounds, and adding in background music. So we're just going to kind of work through giving examples of how to do all these various things, starting with changing gun sounds. I am going to be working in the level associated with the project for this chapter. So it might be beneficial to follow along, but this level does look a little bit different than the ones that we've been working with. The ones we've been working with have been a little bit more realistic looking, where this one is definitely a lot more cartoony. Probably looks like it would belong in like a children's game. So one important thing to keep in mind with doing this environment and adding the sounds to it is you need to make sure you're using appropriate sounds. If this is supposed to be some kind of whimsical children's game, having the realistic gunfire, and let me hit play for a second so that we can hear it. That's not really appropriate for a children's game. So depending on what you're working with, games that you create, you also probably want to change out the gun sounds and maybe, those kind of sounds too. And changing gun sounds is actually really easy. I do want to make note that I did do some pre-work before recording this video. I already have my sound effects in here ready to go. And I already made my sound cues and my sound class for the video, for what I'm going to use. As far as the gun cue, it should be pretty simple. And I did go a little bit past, made it a little bit sillier than it probably should have been. So for your video, for your level, make sure you're choosing sounds that are appropriate, where I just wanted to make, had a little bit of fun with it, but for the actual assignment, make sure you're choosing better sounds than what I chose. But I just have 3 sounds fed into a random and a modulator attached to it. You might not necessarily need a modulator. I just thought it was kind of fun to do this. So if you listen to my my cue.
Bang.
How. How. Bang.
How.
It's a little bit silly, but it'll be fun to implement. But for when you're doing this project, make sure you're taking it a little bit more seriously than what I did. These are just my usual sample sounds that I use when I am demoing how to change the gun, since it's extremely obvious when those get changed. So as far as changing gun sounds, we need to work with the first person, we're working with the first person template in this. And if you have a different type of map, this might be found differently. But this is just if you are creating a map using that Unreal first person template. This is how you change out the gun, and this is where all of those, this is where all of it is. So first things first, we need to go to the blueprints dropdown, and we need to look at open blueprint class, and we are looking for the first person character. Yes, just double checking my notes. So blueprints, open blueprint class, first person character. And we're going to get a whole bunch of stuff in here. Let me open it bigger. And what we are looking for is we are looking for the spawn projectile. So don't mess with any of this stuff. What we want to see is down here underneath the spawn projectile, because this is that gun fire. We don't want to mess with too much in here. So we just are going to look for the place sound at location node, which I believe is right here. And all we need to do is we just need to change the sound playing, because by default it's this first person template weapon fire 2. We just need to find the sound wave that we did, and I called mine, I think, let's see, my gun cue. So it helps if you name your sound cues something very easy to find. But we have that. Just change that again. It should be right here when you open up that blueprint. Let's compile and save. And let's test this out.
Boom.
Bang.
Roll.
Bang.
Boom. Pow.
So now we have our own
Bang. Boom.
gunfire sound. So yeah, think about what you would want for this level. To me, it kind of almost looks like in this environment, once you take out those harsh gun sounds, it almost looks like a Nerf gun or something like that. Or maybe like a ping pong ball fire or like a tennis ball gun. So think about what kind of sounds would be appropriate for a kid's game. And that's it for the gun sound. The next thing we're going to work on is setting up footsteps. And this one is a little bit more involved. So you need to make sure that you're paying kind of close attention. I would also make sure that maybe you watch it once through and take some notes before you try to do it on your, watch it, take some notes, remember some key steps, then attempt it, because there's a lot of little fiddly steps with this one. But this is another one that I already have my footstep cue. And we do want some variation, but with footsteps, it's not like a modulator would be appropriate. And so I have 5 just unique step sounds that sound kind of close, but there's just a little bit of variation in them from the wave I cut up. So if you listen to these nodes, they're almost all the same, but ever so slightly different, and just being fed through a random, no looping. We don't want looping. So that each time we play this cue, it's a different sound. So with the footsteps, the fun thing about what we can do with this with Unreal, if you wanted to, and we're not going to do this for this example, but it's stuff to keep in mind for future projects of your own, is the way that this is set up is it's set up to play your sound based on what material your character is currently standing on. So this example would only have one type of material. It's like this stone kind of ground material. So when you're choosing your sounds for your footsteps, make sure you're picking sounds that sound like someone stepping on a stone surface, because different surfaces, when you walk on them, sound a little bit different. Stone sounds different than carpet, sounds different than wood, sounds different than plate metal. And it is possible to set up different footstep sounds depending on what material you're standing on. So we're going to actually end up setting up stuff with the material. We have our sound cue. We're going to change stuff on the material. We're going to change stuff in the animation. So like I said, it's a little bit involved, but it's really fun to get working. And it's a really neat extra little, like accent that adds to the realism of your games, is adding in footsteps. So let's get started with this. So the first step the first step we need to do is we need to set up a physics material. The physics material is going to end up being on our actual material, we're going to put it on the material in the level, so that when our character is standing on it and moving, we can look at what material we're standing on, and we can tell it what footsteps to play based on that. For this example, we're only doing one, but this easily scales up to multiple types of footsteps. So you'd have a different footstep cue depending on what ground. So it'd be like stone footsteps, wood footsteps, grass footsteps, water footsteps, etc., etc. So first things first, in order to set up our physics material, we first need to go to, let's see, just making sure I'm getting all the steps right. Let's make our physics material first. So I'm going to go to Content. I'm going to right click and make a new folder called Physics Material. And inside of here, I need to make my physics material object. So this would be for any kind of surface that you want to step on. But for us, we are only going to do one surface. So we're going to go to physics and we're going to choose physical material. We're going to then choose physical material because there's only one thing to select here, and click select. I'm then going to name this what that surface is going to be. And this one is going to be stone, since it looks like stone. Like, name it something obvious. If you had multiple surfaces you're going to step on, this is where you'd make like stone, wood, etc., etc., etc. But we should be good with that. And we're going to then double click this to open up the properties of this. Let's see. And what we need to do is we need to tell it what surface type. And by default, there's none in here. It's just the default one. And that's probably not what we want. I guess if you wanted a default surface sound, like if just all of your, like a default footstep, that would be kind of good to work with. And then you have a variety of different ones depending on the surface, maybe. But we want to actually define this as a stone surface type. So in order to do that, we need to add it to our project settings. So let me I'm going to close this real quick. And we're going to go up and get our project settings. And we need to locate in here. Sometimes these can be a little bit hard to find. The physics tab. Let's see. Right here. And we need to scroll down and locate the physical surface settings, which is all the way down here. So you see how we have that default right there? We need to add to this. So we are going to add stone. If you have others types, you would also add those in there, like wood, grass, water, etc., etc. And once we add that, let's close it. Sometimes Unreal has a little bit of a hiccup with this now. So if sometimes it might not appear in here, let's see if it does. No, see how it's not appearing in there? Sometimes you have to kind of force it. Let's see. So we have that, it's not quite there. Let's try opening up the settings again. I can go back to it. I don't know why you have to do this, but I feel it's still there. Let's try opening it up with it open. And now it's there. Yeah, sometimes you might have to like close it, reopen it, close it, reopen it in order for it to appear. So if that happens, just be aware that, yeah, I don't know why. It's done that ever since I started teaching how to do this. It always just kind of takes a second to pop open. But now that we have that set, the engine will then understand that this is kind of tied to that. So it's kind of like it's tagged that this stone material is stone. Let's see, what's next? The next step is going to be to actually put this on the material. So we need to locate this floor material, and I'm just going to click on the mesh to see if I can find that. And we can look at it in here, and there's going to be another little tricky thing with this that I'm going to demonstrate in a second. The reason is because this whole room is one giant object, and it gets a little bit finicky with where the physics material is. But normally what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to locate your ground material, and that's the stone floor. And let's browse to it, and let's open it up. And what we want to do is we want to put our stone physics material in this physical material slot. And let's see if we can just find it. Let's see. Yep, we can just start typing stone. We add it. We want to make sure that we apply and save it. The only thing with this, and normally that's all we would need to do, but Unreal's a little bit finicky, and we actually also need to do that to this brown material. Since it's in element 0, It just gets kind of weird that like you can't just have it on this one. It needs to be on the first element, even though we're not going to be walking on the ceiling. But this is something to keep in mind with if you're designing environments and you do want to do unique footsteps, is that you need to make sure that your material is your first element. So, very quickly go into that M brown material and we'll add that stone physics to this one too. So if it's not quite working, when you go through this, make sure that you did put it on the brown as well. I need to locate this model and just split it into two pieces, but I haven't been able to find it. I had this one made so long ago that I don't know where the original model is. So it's such a nice level. I don't want to change it out. So we can just deal with it. And that is step number 2 is, first we got our physics material set up. That's the first step. Step 2 is getting the actual material on our objects set up. Step 3, if you hadn't done it already, would be to set up your footstep cue. And I already did that one, and I showed it to you. It's this one. And do make sure with all of your sounds that you're making that you're setting it to a correct sound class. I had already done that so that I have a sound class that accepts reverb volumes, since we'd want to do some reverb in here. I'm not going to go over that in this demo. You can look at the previous video on how to set up reverbs, but for this one, it's such a simple level. You'd only need one reverb volume, which is nice. But you do have to make sure that it works. So the next step is going to be to put some specific notes on the character animation of our first person player, so that we're going to have a little notification so that if the animation is playing at specific times during the run animation, it's going to play the footstep cue, which, if you remember, is like it'll fire one sound. So we need to locate our first person run animation. And since this is using that first person the first person example map, this is where you find it. If you're working with another type of map or you set it up yourself, obviously it would be possibly located somewhere else. But we're going to go to first person. We're going to go to animations. And we want to work with the first person run, which is this one right here. This is what we want to put our sounds on. So I'm going to double click on the first person run to open it up. And if you notice, there's only arms in here, and that's fine. Since it's first person, oops, let me stop that. Since this is a first person, you never actually see the legs. So there's no actual legs in here. This does kind of give us a bit of a problem, since we need to figure out, normally if this was a third person, we'd see a third person, 3D person running in place. But we need to figure out, when is the foot going to be hitting the ground? And since this is a walk cycle, we know that this should be 2 steps. So, the first foot plant, then the second foot plant, and then when it loops again, it would be the first and the second again, which we can kind of deduce that there's going to be 2 footsteps in this animation. And if there's 2 footsteps, the right foot and left foot, we can also guess when that's going to be. So we probably want to have one footstep halfway and then the other footstep at the end. And that'll give us a nice, even, clop clop sort of sound of someone running at an even pace, which is what we want to go for with that. So let's see. First things first, let's set up that midway, and we can kind of scrub this about halfway through. And this is how many frames? It looks like 25 frames. So halfway through is going to be roughly between 12 and 13. I'll probably just put it at the 12, or if you want to just put it right in the middle, that's fine too. Somewhere around there. And we need to then come up to here. I'm going to right click and I want to add a notify. And I want to add a new notify because I want to specify what this notify is called. And this one is going to be called Footstep. And, you know, remember exactly how you spell this and remember what you call it because it's going to be important later. So what we're just going to do is this Footstep notify is going to say, when we're playing this animation and you hit this part in the frames, we're going to force it to play a footstep sound. So we'll get our one footstep. And then we just need to go to the end. We'll scrub to the end. And we're going to add another notify, a new notify called Footstep. And make sure that these are named exactly the same. We don't really need to, at least for our character, we don't need to specify a right foot and a left foot. If you, for some reason, needed to, you could say right foot, left foot. Like if you had a player that was maybe had like a peg leg, so like one leg would sound different for, you know, story reasons or whatever, you could have, you know, one sound cue that has like a wooden sound, you know, like a wood hitting something sound for like a peg leg, and then the other one would be a boot sound, like if you had like a pirate character or something. So you could, you know, differentiate this if you needed to, but we don't need to. We are going to just have it be, you know, the same sound. So let's make sure that we are saving this. I'm going to click save because the next step is going to be doing some blueprints. And with doing the blueprints, I want to, I'm going to kind of do it in a couple little pieces so that I'm going to kind of put some nodes down and then I'm going to go back and explain exactly what these nodes do. So keep that in mind. I'm going to do a little bit and then explain what they do. So, you know, if you feel like you're getting lost, just, you know, that's why I kind of recommend maybe watch it before you do it, so that you have an understanding of what's going on. So to open up the blueprint, we want to do a blueprint on this actual animation. So I'm going to click the blueprint button up here to switch to the blueprint window. And then we need to go to the event graph. We're not in the state machine, we're going to be working in the event graph. If you ever need to get back to that other panel, you can just click your animation to go back here, but we're doing the blueprint event graph. So first things first, don't mess with anything that's already in here. We need to find a nice big open area for us to work in. So I'm going to kind of come up here and zoom in a little bit. And the first node we want to place is going to be a line trace by channel. Let me zoom in a little bit closer. And I am going to work on the left side of this. And remember, I'm going to go back and explain all of this kind of, you know, after I get some stuff put in. So after we get that, we are going to pull off from this arrow, and we want to search for, let's see, what is it called? Add anim. We might need to make sure I'm choosing the right one. Let's see, sorry about that. Let me, it's an add atom and anim notify event for this the footstep. And this is the word that you should have called, you know, this is whatever you put that notify in Unreal. So that's what this is looking for. It's saying, hey, when we get that notify called footstep, this is what we're going to do. And let's see, we need to also we're going to right click in an empty spot and look for try get pawn owner. And we're going to pull off of this and say get actor location, and this is going to go into the start. And what else do we need to do? We need to pull another one off of here and add a vector plus vector node. And this is going to go into our end. And this in here, we need to give it a Z of, we'll do -500. So what are we doing? What is all of this stuff? So what this is we're actually going to be doing a ray trace. And what we're going to use this as when we're going to start that ray trace. So you've probably done, I'm sorry, not ray trace, raycast. We're going to be doing, I always get those two words confused. We're going to be casting some rays, and we're going to be doing that when we hit our notify footsteps. So when we get to that notify, we are going to cast a ray. And what are we going to do with that? And where are we casting that? If you've ever you've probably learned this, I think by now you would have learned this in your way back in SGD 113 when we were doing raycasting for clicking on objects in Unity, when we would for the mouse click buttons, where we were casting a ray from the camera to the mouse to see what we clicked on. And this is almost sort of the same kind of concept, but what we're doing is we are trying to figure out what surface is our character on so that we can play the appropriate footstep sound, because we're setting it up so that you can play a different footstep sound depending on what surface you're on. So when we have our footstep, we're going to cast a ray. Where are we casting it? Because remember, we have to tell it where to start, which is what this is, and where to stop. We are starting at the player. That's what this is. Get the pawn owner and get its location. We are going to end 500 Unreal units downwards. So it's going to basically start, I think, I don't remember if it starts at like the, in the torso or in the head of the character. I don't quite remember where Unreal does it, but somewhere, in the middle of the character, pointed downwards, because we want to look at what the player is standing on. And if we go 500 units and there's nothing there, we're probably not standing on anything. So that is what this is all set up to do. One last thing we need to do on this side. We want to make sure that we're not accidentally looking at the material on our player's feet. This one, it isn't quite that big of a deal because we don't have feet, but it's just good practice to get into to set this all up that, we ignore whatever is on the material on the player. In order to do that, we're going to just pull another line off of this try get pawn owner. And we are going to add a make array. And so we're going to put the player into this array, and we're just going to feed this into this actors to ignore, because this is just supposed to be an array of objects that we're not supposed to care about, if the ray hits it. So if we're looking down and, if you could think about it as a laser coming out of the player's head, and we're looking downwards to look at what the player's standing on, we're ignoring the feet. Ignore your feet. That's not important to making footstep sounds, because we're not, stepping on like leather or plastic or whatever your shoes are made out of. So that's the left side of this. Let's move on to the right side of it. And again, I'm going to kind of go through some stuff, and then I'm going to go back and kind of explain it a little bit better. So on the output side, we are going to make a place sound at location node right here. And on the out hit, we're going to add a break hit result. Let's make some room. And then we are going to need to open this up, and we need to put this impact point into the location. Okay, next we need to pull another out hit, and we are looking for a get surface type node. So get surface type. Getting a little bit crowded. Let me see if I can organize this a little bit nicer so you can see all the connections. And then we need to pull off the return value and get a select node. If I can type. There it is. Notice you should see your stone, and we should have the wild card. Isn't that neat how that's in there? And we'll talk about that in a second. And then, let's see what's next. We are going to hook up this return into, hold on, let me just make sure. We want to turn this return value into the sound right here. And notice that this does now suddenly give us some options down here once that's hooked up. So what we need to do then is we need to make sure that we change the stone to our footstep sounds, our footstep node, footstep cue, or whatever you called it. Okay, so a lot of extra things over here. Let me explain what this all does. So here is where we're casting our ray downwards, ignoring our feet and just looking to see what we're standing on. If we get something, we want to see, we're getting that impact point. We're saying, where did that ray hit? We are going to, if we hit something at that impact point, we're going to play a sound at that, impact point. So it should sound like it's coming from your feet and not some in the head or somewhere else in the environment. That's what this is. And we do need to play our footstep sound. So what we're going to also do is where we hit, look at the material, get that surface. And based on what the surface is it stone? Do you have a wood? Do you have a water? Do you have a grass? Do you have a carpet? A vinyl tile? Whatever that surface physics is tagged as, play the associated sound with it at that location. So this is where if you had multiple surface types, all those physics materials we set up, and that's why we had to put it in the engine, like in that engine properties, those appear here. Whatever you put in that project stuff. And that's why we had to tag that physics material as stone and then put that in the material. Those would appear here, and you could associate the specific sound steps for those. And that should be it. So let's make sure we can compile and save. And we should be good to go. This should now work in our game. So let me turn this off. Make this bigger. And let's hope that this works.
Thanks.
Oh.
And we do. It's a little bit wonky. I'd probably want to be a little bit carefuler with my footstep sounds as far as making sure that if you look at the wave files that they are lined up to play at the same time. They don't have any kind of delays. Maybe I would want to kind of fix some of the randomness in that cue. Like maybe I'd mostly want to play one sound of my footsteps. So maybe like, let me pick one. Maybe like this one. I can't hear that. What am I doing wrong? Let me turn up my volume a little bit. Why can't I hear this? Let me pause the video for a second. I might need to restart. Sorry, I got it going again. Okay, so maybe, you know, we want to kind of cut down the randomness on this so that we're getting mostly the same, and then we just get like a really different sounding one every once in a while. So maybe like we'll give, let's see, maybe like the 0, like a bigger weight, like give these 5s and 5s, and those other ones can be 1s, because those sound pretty similar. So if we play the cue, I feel like that didn't really change it. Maybe I'm going the wrong way with it. Let's see. Which way do the weights go? Let's give this a weight of 10. And see if it just never plays or if it plays all the time. Why is that random not working? Try again. I think it's this step 3 that sounds really weird. I think I might just take step 3 out. I don't know why that's not working. Let's just do this. Let's see if this sounds a little bit better. So yeah, take some time to make sure that your footsteps do sound good.
Thank.
And that's getting there. Okay, so last thing we need to do is we need to add in some music. We haven't done music really, and we just want to add a little bit of background music. And it's really easy. This is probably going to be the easiest thing you're going to do in this week's lesson, but we are just going to do it the easy way. I'm sure there might be like a better practice way to add music, but for us, we're just new at doing music, and a lot of times, you know, we're new at doing sounds. We just want to get it done. So I have a music cue that just has my music in here that is appropriate for this level, and I made sure to change it to looping. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this music cue in my level. I want to make sure that, oops, sorry about that. I want to make sure that, let's see, we actually don't want any attenuation. Music should not attenuate because it should just sound consistent to the whole environment. Maybe there's a story reason that sometimes it might attenuate. Like if you think about, if you ever played Ocarina of Time and you're trying to go through the Lost Forest and you're trying to follow, you know, you follow the music. So some places it gets louder, some places it gets quieter. That would probably just be handled differently and not with attenuation. That'd probably be handled with code. So music should not attenuate. It should not spatialize. We want to make sure that we have our autoplay on, since it should just play when we start it. Auto active should be on. And the only thing we might need to manipulate is its volume. The other thing we should also keep in mind with placing music is it shouldn't have reverb. So you're going to be setting a reverb volume in here. This music should not reverb with that, because it would be really strange if you were walking through an environment and you enter a cave and suddenly the music is like super reverby. We really don't want that to happen. So we can always adjust the volume here too, this volume multiplier, but let's hit play and see how it just sounds just like this.
Thank.
So it might be a little bit too loud. There's nothing worse than background music that's way too loud in a game that just annoys you. So if you make a music sound class, you could fix it that way too, since you don't want it to be in your main sound class. But the other just easy way, if you just need something real quick to fix your music, would be to just come down and we can take this volume multiplier down. Let's try it again.
Bang. Oh, bang.
That might be a little bit better. Personally, myself, I really can't stand super loud background. Let's make it even quieter. That might be good enough. Let's try it again. There we go. And that is it for the demo. So let me talk a little bit about this environment for what you have to do. So the obvious things, you need to build a soundscape that is appropriate for this environment. This is a kid's game. It's like a witch's sort of hut, and everything needs sound. There's a lot of fun things to put in. We have this cauldron that's bubbling. We have a fire underneath it. Notice it is not a crazy boil. It is a subtle, whimsical bubble. It's not a raging, gonna scald you, crazy spaghetti cooking boil. The fire is kind of subtle. We also have these cute little candles that are flickering. They might have a little bit of sound. And we have this magical ball over here too that could have some cool sound effects. So we need to have reverb. We need to have an overall soundscape. We need to have background music playing. You need to come up with a better gun sound, and we need appropriate footsteps in here. So, you know, think about what you want to do with this. You might want to have, you know, if you have like an overall ambient, you could think of that too. Maybe just nothing overpowering though, since we do have some background music, but if you can think of something that would fit with this, go for it. So if you have any questions, again, ask your instructors, but that should be it for this chapter.